Our next group of creative leaders will explore how producing real-time media is different from producing traditional attraction content. They'll talk about the current state of real-time hardware and discuss whether an attraction can be built ever to be truly future-proofed. The group will also explore inclusivity and how to ensure that real-time attractions is fun for everyone. Once again, please welcome Michael Libby and his colleagues to speak on this intriguing topic.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Libby. I'm the founder and CEO of Worldbuildr, and I'm happy to have you all here joining me for the second part of our discussion on real-time magic and how game engines are completely transforming our industry. In the first half of our discussion today, we talked about the pre-visualization and construction benefits from real-time media. And in the second part of our discussion, we're going to be talking here about the actual product itself, the new attractions that are starting to be designed and open that use some of these real-time technologies and interactivity on behalf of the guests. So I'm ecstatic to welcome our panelists here, Robert Huebner, Asa Kalama, Louis Alfieri, and Laurence Beckers. We have a who's who of interactive designers who are experts in attractions that use real-time media. I'm very appreciative that you all agreed to be here. And I just want to start with a very, very brief description, if anyone's just joining us right now, of what real-time media is and how it's different from traditional pre-rendered media. Really, the main difference is that pre-rendered media, you can take as long as you want to make it. We've all heard stories about Pixar movies where each frame takes days to render, and so you get that amazing Pixar look. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about each frame taking a millisecond to render. And really, the media is created by code and is displayed in real time by game engines. Traditionally, these video cards allow the game to be displayed at frame rates of 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, even 60 frames per second or higher. But they're being rendered on the fly. So it's a combination of the assets that you create as well as the code that runs it and the hardware that is operating the whole thing. So those are the components you need to create real-time attractions. The purpose of this panel is to talk to some people who have had hands-on experience with combining all of those different elements together and creating some of the first attractions of their kind that use this new technology. So I want to open this panel by talking to the creatives and asking them, we always talk about how this is an industry of imagination and creating things that we've never been done before. But when you start to work inside the industry, you see that it's actually quite a risk-averse industry. And we like to do things that we've done before because they've been proven successes. So my first question for all of you is that this technology is undeniable, but it comes with risk. And in fact, any R&D project comes with risk. So at the very beginning, when you're pitching a project to the powers that be, how do you sell an interactive attraction that uses real-time content? How do you make the stakeholders understand what you're trying to do, how it's going to be better, and how it's going to be fundamentally different from anything that they've ever done before? And let's start with Louis.
Well, I think, from our perspective, you have to understand the nature of the storytelling, the technology, and the audience that you're going to articulate. And in each case, it's communicating to the owner what the benefit of this story and this technology is going to be to their brand and to their facility and to their audience. And it's also helping them understand that where we are at, particularly with this technology, is that it's about to influence all of design, storytelling, and creative that's forthcoming after it. And to understand that particularly this use of game engine technology and this notion that Unreal and Unity are really going to become super platforms, that they're at the forefront of creating something that's no longer linear storytelling, that allows you an opportunity either to look at a passive experience in a different way or to use a linear multi-branching narrative, say, for instance, like a project like Star Tours, which is a series of elements that are variable within a linear narrative, or to help them begin to understand the notion of creating a completely open world format where you have an ability to explore that and customize that to each of the guests to create a nonlinear narrative that allows choices along the way to be generated in real time to create different outcomes for each individual, and how that can be broken up even by demographic or different audiences for different elements that they're creating, and to help the owner understand what is proven technology and what you're developing as an attraction, and what is the unknown technology and where the risk is. To that note that you mentioned about risk aversity, you need to make the owner understand where there's risk within the content, what level of risk that is, and how you can collaboratively work to create solutions to that and mitigate that, as well as for their marketing group and their finance and development group to understand where the risk creates value to them in the future. Because the notion of taking the risk is something that's going to differentiate them from their competitors, and what the value of that is to their audience overall. So you have to look at it not in a singular solution, but as a total kind of ecosystem. How does that work as a complete whole?
And Laurence, you have a relationship with some of your clients that goes back many years, where you've done several attractions for some of your clients. There's obviously an element of trust there as well. So how do you get your client on board with, hey, we're going to try something that's never been done before with real-time media?
In fact, I've never had a customer that were really asking, are you going to use real time or not? We've made interactivity since the beginning of Alterface, and it was always about the final result. What is going to be on the screen, what is going to be the experience of the user. So when discussing at the very first stage with the customer, we were not really asking us what is the best choice. Are you going to use pre-rendered movie or real time? It was more about our choice to know, okay, I have in the balance the quality and the feedback, the interactivity, and something that is going to react to the users. What is the best choice? And 15 years ago, for us, it was a real balance between the quality and the feedback in real time. And as we were making interactive movie, interactive theaters, we have made pre-rendered movie for years. But now we don't have this choice anymore. We can really make very nice content in real time and have the real feedback. So, for example, we've made 2 attractions that was 12 or 15 years ago in pre-rendered movie, and the customer has been asking us to make again some of the scenes in real time. For example, we've made an interactive dinosaur, and this dinosaur was like a mirror in front of the customer, the guest, and it was reacting in live. When you were just quiet, the dinosaur was quiet, and when you get more dynamic, the dinosaur was more angry. And before that, it was really hard to make a feedback that was spontaneous. You had to make the movies, go to a certain neutral pose, and then play the other things. But now this dinosaur is really reacting to all the guests. You can have something happening when there is one player, when there are 2 players, when there is a lot of players, and so it's really more efficient. So in the museum, in this case, they ask us to make the new content in real time to have a better feedback. And we had the same with a haunted house. We have a very big face of Carly, a zombie, who was just jumping out of the screen. And at that moment, it was supposed to be a kind of climax with all the people shooting at this Carly. But before that, you can just put kind of layers on the skin where the people were shooting. But now the Carly's face is really reacting, and it's really more realistic, and so more frightening, more better for an immersive experience for the visitors in this case.
Of course, that can only be accomplished with real-time media. Now, Asa and Robert, you had the task of delivering on the guest expectation of flying the Millennium Falcon. That was quite the thing that you were assigned. And I'm curious, at what point did you realize that you had to go the route of real-time media?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great question. And for us, we never started from the technology that we wanted to employ. We really started from what was the role that we wanted the guest to play? What is their relationship to the experience? And when we talked about sort of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge in its totality, right, we were really interested in this idea of inviting guests to participate and really feel like they were living their own Star Wars story. And so as soon as you make that decision, right, there really is only one possible way to deliver the Millennium Falcon experience, right? As soon as we make that promise that this is a place where you get to step into the story, it necessarily can't be passive anymore, right? And so right from the outset, from the very first moment we decided that we wanted to make a Millennium Falcon experience, we knew that it had to be brought to life in a way that allowed guests to participate, which necessarily meant that the content had to be rendered in real time.
And of course, once that happened, Robert, from a technical and media standpoint, what was your plan, for accomplishing things that perhaps had not been invented yet?
Yeah, I mean, we worked really closely with our partners like ILM and NVIDIA to try to figure out how to build something that really wasn't mainstream at the time. I think often WDI finds themselves a little ahead of that curve, going all the way back to, Disney Quest interactive experiences. So we had some of that to draw on and some expertise on these early experiments, that are small scale. We were just really blowing out the scale and blowing out the quality level to a higher level, higher degree than teams had done before. So there was prior art, but there was also a lot of pain in the process of getting there.
Well, now the Millennium Falcon Smugglers Run attraction is the prior art. And it's been really helpful for me sort of as a touchstone to explain to clients, this is what you can get. This is the type of agency you can get for your guests and the type of individual experience. One thing I do want to talk about is the difference between game development and game design. And when you're talking about real-time media, it doesn't necessarily have to be interactive. It can be procedural, and it can be created based on variables drawn from elsewhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be interactive, though. Adding a gaming element, such as shooting or getting points, that's game design, which is different from software development, more of a technical skill set. The game design is really a new creative skill set that is increasingly necessary within our industry. And I think a lot of companies don't necessarily realize that those two things are different from each other. So I'm hoping you can all talk to me about your process of getting the gameplay right and testing things and, play testing and seeing what works and what doesn't, and really refining that gameplay loop before you start coding and before you start creating the real software development.
Laurence team at Alterface and Sally and ourselves did the Reese's Cup Fusion project for the Hershey brand. And in that case, we had the opportunity to create an original IP, to develop a series of characters, and look at a very wide range of interactions and forms of gameplay that we wanted to reach multiple audiences through different times of the year. So we were looking at engaging very different segments of their consumer audience in different ways and different levels of interaction. So we began looking at it at kind of three levels of engagement. How could we create a passive story for grandparents who aren't necessarily wanting to become active with an engagement of what's functioning in the game? How could we create something for the youngsters that attend in the park that were kind of simple physical targets or large media-based targets? And then how could we, for the deep diver or the teen or the adult, that's very used to playing kind of first-person shooter games or variable games with multiple levels and levels of discovery within the game. How could we achieve those kind of components within the game? And how could we create variation in those game levels, screen to screen? Or how could you create an ascent of those experiences from the beginning of the attraction to the end of the attraction, allowing all three of those variables to change during gameplay throughout the attraction? So we drew out a number of experiential maps, how we wanted that to play, and we identified as a team what elements were visible to the guest, what kinds of activities could we make functional throughout gameplay that would release different levels or characters or functions, as well as Easter eggs throughout the attraction. So we began very much as kind of a Tex Avery cartoon exercise, storyboarding and scripting like you would a film, all of these different functions of all of these different characters, and then working together as a team to develop the technology and test that to ascertain what worked for each age group. How would that translate from screen to screen, traveling with the linear character? How would gameplay work on the amount of time you have on the screen to release Easter eggs? It was very much a highly iterative, highly collaborative process that went through, and it's really an interesting ride because we also have kind of a physical three-dimensional world that we've rendered in graphics in the same way as the media world. So trying to create kind of that simplified gameplay in the physical world with simple foreground media, as well as very highly detailed, fast-moving components deeper into the media for the more skilled player.
Yeah, and I think you're right to sort of draw the distinction between, the real-time media creation and interaction design and game design. And I would offer that, creating an experience for our theme park is an entirely different category in and unto itself. Because if you think about, maybe more traditional digital-based game design, it's often built around a known platform, right? Where the interface is understood, the way that it's going to be presented is generally well understood. In the context of designing for theme park, all of those things are variable. So not only do you have the underlying gameplay mechanic to figure out, but also the interface that guests are going to be engaging with, the way that that content is going to be presented, because it's not on a flat monitor, the way in which the ride profile interacts with that overall experience, the sort of context of the fact that you're in a theme park and the fact that the duration of the experience is, inherently much shorter than a more traditional, again, console-based game, if you will. So that feedback loop of, iteration is really important, but it's also very, very unique in that you don't have all of those pieces when you start designing the experience, right? You don't have the console already built and the interface already built. So, on Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, we started off with displays, touchscreen displays, as the fastest way to start to iterate on the notion of, core gameplay loop, and, rough sense of the types of interface elements that we thought might be interesting. But obviously, touching buttons on a flat monitor is very different than the tactile feel of a joystick or a button, right? So as soon as you get those elements in to prototype with, then all of a sudden it's a whole new round of iteration, a whole new round of discovery, right? Maybe you even get to the place where you've got, a whole panel's worth of buttons, but you're still working on, a flat, 27-inch monitor. Well, as soon as you get into the, real projection environment, which is a dome, which has a much wider field of view, all of a sudden, all of those things that maybe worked really well on a flat monitor go out the window, because now all of a sudden your relationship to that media fundamentally changes. Oh, and then by the way, then you place it on a motion base later, and all of a sudden now you're moving, right? And so all of these elements have a really interesting, inextricably related relationship to one another. And so it's constant alignment and tuning and play testing at every phase of the project, bringing in guests or players as close to as representative as the final guest as you possibly can, to learn all those things as early as you possibly can.
I was just going to agree with what Asa said. I think what we found is that the most precious commodity is actually attention. Like getting the player's attention or the guest's attention was a constant fight between this sound or that light or this flashing button. And I think game designers don't really face that same dilemma. They assume their player is sitting down in front of a screen and they're dedicated to playing this game for a half hour, and they're probably already bought into the genre. So in a way, a theme park attraction design, game design instincts might not be quite correct. They might lead you astray, or they might lead you into a pursuing a much more attention needy sort of interaction than what I think the guests are able to handle in our environment.
Yeah, and to that end, I mean, to add to that is the notion that it has to be very intuitive. You don't have much time, as to what Asa was saying, so you've really got to pick up on it quickly. And things that we were working on with Laurence and team, we're kind of giving people visual cues, a sense of how, like when you think about VR storytelling, you're leading people through that with audio or lighting or visual cues. How do we help in this very short window of time? How do we lead people to understand what they can discover in those explorations to lead them in that opportunity?
I was just going to say, I think that element of time is such a critical constraint and such a unique, so incredibly unique to the domain of theme park design, right? A lot of, again, PC or console-based game design or even mobile-based game design, a lot of that gameplay loop comes, the sort of mastery comes through trial and error, right? It's the fact that you try something, oh, well, that didn't work, or maybe I died, but that's part of the gameplay loop is, oh, well, now I understand how to move forward and advance later, right? But in the context of a fixed duration attraction, you don't have that luxury, right? Oh, and by the way, it's a fixed duration, generally speaking, right? Which means, even though you want it to be participatory, you want it to be interactive, you want to let people have choice, no matter what, when that ride vehicle gets back to the load station, you have to be done with your story, right? And so it's a very, very unique constraint that's unlike, I think, any other type of traditional game design.
I think that's absolutely right. And Laurence, you, in your most recent attraction, Popcorn's Revenge, I believe the system is actually dynamic enough that it can change the difficulty for the individual guests as the ride progresses. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. In fact, we can really adapt the level of difficulties to the player. So we can see if someone is not really playing and we can help him in a way. And if someone is really a good shooter, like a teenager that is really good at pointing, then we can spawn more, target more popcorn. So we can really adapt the level of difficulties of the game so that everyone can end the game with a kind of satisfaction, because you want all the kids to be happy. And so if they are very, very small kids, they can still enjoy and have this feeling, oh, I've done the deal, I've done the goal. And so we have made an adaptation. And also, I was totally agree with all your point that we have to make something that is really easy to understand, because the people are not going to listen to the instruction. It's not like a game that you buy and you sit in your room and you really try to find what is the goal, how can I use this joystick or whatever. Here you have some guests speaking all together with the family. Suddenly they are in the vehicle and okay, what should I do? And so it has to be very efficient in terms of gameplay. It has to be something that just understand without any instruction. And also you have to deal with the curve so that it's quite easy at the beginning, so they can try the device, they can understand how to use it, and then you can add the difficulties, kind of crescendo during the dynamic of the game.
Is to that end, and this is true also, I believe, with Smuggler's Run, is creating other elements to the game that are not immediately visible on your first, second, or third ride. That level of discovery is there for the user and the guest, a level of complexity that you can discover and release. Like, so in the nature of a console user, you learn certain moves to release a character or a function. In the case of what we're designing in the experiential space, you'll have to ride it 3 or 4 times to be able to learn what that opportunity is. But even though we may not be able to land that in the first 4 minutes in the attraction, the hope is that in rewriting this attraction and learning that if you're a fan of it, that we're still building those elements into it, but you'll have to ride several times to make those discoveries and release those opportunities.
I was going to say, I think one of the other really fascinating variables, right, in the context of a theme park is generally for the sake of capacity, right? You have more people involved in that interactive experience than you might have in a more traditional game, right? Even if you're doing like co-op play, right? Typically people are, playing on their own screen, right, and have control of their own camera, right? But in the context of a ride vehicle, everybody is working collaboratively, right? And so a lot of those, invisible systems that Laurence was talking about become, really important. Not only, difficulty ramping, but, we do all sorts of, very surreptitious things in the background on Smuggler's Run, like, because the pilot can point the ship in any direction they want to, that means that they can point the camera away from where the TIE fighters are. Well, that's not very fun for the gunners right? So then we dynamically reroute the TIE fighters to always fly in front of the camera, no matter what the pilot is doing, to try to make it feel as, natural as possible. Or, if the pilot maybe doesn't understand how the control works or is just trying to grief it and is holding it to, all the way down just to see what happens, again, because we know that's not a great experience for the rest of the people in the cockpit, we'll take a corrective action and actually lift the nose of the ship. So again, we can reframe the action to be as cinematic as possible for as many people as possible.
That's fascinating. So you can actually basically frame your shot procedurally and, make sure that the enemy ships are always in sight and things like that based on whichever direction the cockpit is pointing. And that can only be done with real-time media. I had a similar moment when I went to go see the Star Wars experience at the Void. And I was deflecting I was deflecting laser bolts back at Darth Vader with my light. No, I was shooting at Darth Vader and he was deflecting the lightsaber bolts back at me. And I remember thinking, like, how is this happening? Like, he's angling it right back at me and they're somehow hitting me and he's making contact with all of my shots. That's code and that's real-time media. And that previously could not have been done before. Now, here's a big question. Real-time attractions, which do lean on video games. Games draw from emergent behavior. They're about user stories where the system may not change, but the user, can kind of create their own narrative or create their own story. Now we actually do have this technology where in a theme park or attraction setting, we can give a unique story to each guest. How does that affect just the fundamentals of narrative and storytelling in our industry, which, for 65 years has been telling linear stories for all ages?
I think it's a remarkable opportunity. We stand at the beginning of a capability set in terms of storytelling and agency that has never existed before in our medium. We as an industry manifest things from the ether. We think about things that haven't been created before, and we're able to articulate those, bring those as stories and experiences to people. But we're also able to do that as a commercial entity. Our companies all require kind of a huge volume of people to participate in these things to facilitate their cost for construction and implementation. What this opportunity presents us is a way to move away from necessarily having to be only geographically based, but to allow this kind of gameplay and interaction to free up our borders, to allow us to create a end-to-end user customer journey where you may be able to participate in this story with agency and true activity before you come to the park, in the park, and then after the park. We are at the very beginning of this nature of how this game engine and this design tool is going to expand the border of everything we're doing creatively exponentially. I mean, and not only is it a question of linear story or observance of using buttons, but we're talking about an expansion into gestural interface, eye tracking, the use of the iPhone 12 being a LiDAR device and photogrammetry of creating a three-dimensional gray model of the planet that we inhabit. In a few years, like the Google Maps, there may be a replica of the Earth that we can experience and have kind of an in-game world like the Oasis or in-game currency and purchases. I mean, I probably jump out of my skin. I'm so excited about like what the possibilities are. It's just infinite.
Yeah, I mean, I think broadly, the ability to create content in real time is, an arrow in the designer's quiver, right? I think it's no different than the other elements that we bring to bear in the creation of immersive experiences. And I think, it is an incredibly powerful tool, but I also don't necessarily think it is the only one. And so I think it's really appropriate to think about its application on a case-by-case basis. Again, really depending on the type of experience that you want to create, for the guest, right? I think there are some stories that can only be told and are exceptional and authentic and memorable because they are, truly participatory. But there are just as many stories that are best told in a more traditional linear format. So it really is, I think, at the discretion of design teams to determine what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And know that they now have this amazing, toolkit to play with that was never available before, and decide whether it's appropriate to apply.
There's the opportunity to do the sort of to narrow down to the individual experience, but I think the highest calling, especially in a theme park, is to make these interactive group, stories. Like what happened to the crew of the Millennium Falcon, or what happened to the people in the escape room. It's really, that's something that you can't really do at home. So I think rather than compete with what you can do one-on-one or in VR, I'm mostly excited about what you can do with 6 people in a room or even 100 people in a theater, and how can you make them have a group experience that even video games are gravitating now toward group user stories. And we're finding that's what's most memorable, is that if people are in a small group and they had just this awesome experience, that stays with them more than something they do one-on-one against the computer.
I want to stay with VR for a second. You just mentioned it. It's the first time it's been mentioned during this discussion. VR, I think there was a wave within our industry a couple of years ago where we were just trying it out, experimenting with it, putting it on roller coasters and things like that, to varying success. But the thing I really want our audience to understand is that VR is a display. And it is one way of experiencing real-time content. It's a camera that is placed in a real-time environment. So if VR is not for you, that does not mean that real-time content is not for you. There are many other ways to experience it. And in fact, some of the things that we were just talking about use real-time engines, but don't create any media at all. They're really using it more as a game brain that tracks, state conditions and individual metadata attached to guests and things like that. So that's one aspect of game engines that guests might never see, but that may be sort of the puppet master that's pulling the strings for the entire experience during the day. I want to go back to the production of media using game engines, because it's a fundamentally different process. And a lot of media producers have had to relearn or learn new technology and new software and new tools. As opposed to composing things for a frame, you're really building out a 3D scene and then deciding where to put the camera later. So my question is, how does that media production process, where you don't necessarily have to lock your media until opening, or even maybe after opening, how does that, is that a good thing or a bad thing for production? And how does that affect other elements, like some of the hardware and button inputs and things like that do have to be locked at a certain time? How does that work out? Oh, and hardware, of course, you have to lock as well. The computers, the video cards, all that stuff. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
I think it was one rules of Pixar that at one point you have to stop and decide, okay, this project is over. I can make it better, but it will be the next one. You need to say stop now. It's okay. But for the rest, real time is really a tool that is powerful, because it means you can start and play and go as far as you can at the office, and maybe you can make a small screen and try with some visitors to test the game, but then you can really fine-tune when you are on site. For example, when you have a vehicle and you want to have a parallax in the scene, you can really use this real time to fine-tune it so that it seems to be perfect. It really fits to the movement of the vehicle. Or also you can really look at the big image, because when it's small on the screen, it's okay. But sometimes when you see it for real, in the real condition, there is kind of motion thickness because it moves too fast, or it's not going well. So you can really adapt everything. So I think it's really useful for the fine-tune phase. And also you have to learn to your customer that the steps and the milestones are going to be different, and why you make these steps and what they are going to validate at some point, because the process is different. But I really think that it brings a lot in terms of fine-tuning the things and bringing everything together so that it's just perfect in terms of time, quality, speed, and everything.
Yeah, I do want to, though, caution against the assumption that was implied in your sort of setup that because it is real time, that means you don't have to decide as early, or you can defer those decisions until opening day. I think in many ways, working with real-time content forces you to make those decisions much earlier than you would in the case of something that's actually pre-rendered, because you can show up with a thumb drive containing a brand new render of a scene, plug it into your traditional linear experience, and chances are that's going to play back fine, right? There's a high degree of probability. However, in a real-time environment, maybe you want to change the texture on that thing or move that model just to the left or tweak that one light. That could be game-breaking, right? All of a sudden, this thing that has been working beautifully now all of a sudden flips upside down for some reason and all the textures are backwards, right? And so in some respects, you actually have to make those decisions much earlier because you're not just shipping the experience after that. You have to then go through that whole QA process after the fact to make sure that those changes and those revisions that you made didn't fundamentally alter some other system or some other part of the experience in a really unexpected way.
I would just add that you have to make your job as an art director. Everything has to be consistent. So, okay, you make some real-time content for the media, but still there is this music, there is this sound, there is a thematization. Everything has to be consistent. So you have to have a clear idea of the result you want to reach. You still have to make your job and decide, okay, this is going, I want to make this story, I want to have that kind of decor, and now I see the design package from the studio who is making the decor, and it has to fit with the content that another studio is making for the media. So you have to make your job as you used to do it before. I mean, having a clear direction in your mind, in your brain, and knowing where you want to go. But it's just very practical at the very end when you want to fine tune. You can have some parameters and you can play the game and see if it's too difficult or too easy, and you can make the balance. That's really practical, I think.
There's definitely a big risk in waiting until the end to get your final renders and get that final quality. With a video attraction, making it look twice as good in the last few days is probably a great thing. Your final renders are going to look awesome. But again, going back to this fight for attention, this is not a theoretical, this is a very real problem in that when we actually, for the first time, put in the very highly detailed backgrounds, it was just overwhelming to the guest, and you couldn't see the TIE fighters that you wanted to see and shoot at. So suddenly this, what normally could be a last little polish pass became we have to really rebalance everything to get the attention back to where it needs to be. So I think finding a way to test with final quality assets earlier is pretty critical to have your attraction launch successfully.
And I would just add as a last point, my experience so far has been, as a person who likes to explore lots of options through the design process, that the nature of the real-time rendering as a tool has allowed us to iterate much more rapidly exploration of different solutions as a design tool early and midpoint through the process, to try different camera angles, different solutions, to prove them out and test them in a early kind of pre-visualization phase, or to test riskier objects more rapidly than we would in kind of previous methodologies or solutions.
Definitely, yeah. These previs tools are starting to advance, and I think Unity and Unreal are, as you said earlier, gonna really change the game moving forward. No pun intended. Robert, I would love to hear from you about kind of the final integration steps from a technical standpoint, and Laurence from a creative standpoint, integrating the events that happen on screen procedurally through the real-time media with the show control in the environment. When an explosion happens, when a TIE fighter blows up, the lights in the cabin have to make it look like there's an explosion. And, that's what really creates the magic. And then, of course, things like, multiple projectors stitched together that have to recalibrate and, have to be bright enough, and video cards that have to be powerful enough, and screens that have to be painted a certain shade so there's no reflection or bounce. How does all of that come together in the field?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a session all unto itself. I mean, this is where it's obvious it's still kind of an infant technology. Like, these are not solved problems. How to mix your sound for the configuration of speakers you have is not a solved problem. So this is still where the unique, professionals in this industry have to, roll up their sleeves and start inventing things or getting things done. The good news is, though, things like those video cards and the computers are getting more and more commoditized, cheaper, easier to get your hands on. So part of the equation is getting easier, while throwing new technologies into the mix constantly is making it more challenging. So
yes, and still, even if it's cheaper, there is always this balance between the creative team who can have the ideas, and then the project manager and the software developer. So one is going to take care of the budget and the planning, but still you have inside the budget to decide this time, maybe I want more special effect and I want more budget on the light, or I want to have more budget on the gameplay. For example, I want to have different and I want to produce more media, or in this case, the audio is very, very important. So anyway, even if the technology for the real time is getting cheaper, it's still a job to really decide the balance between all the spots that you want. And it's really a team effort to define, okay, in this case, I'm going to take this projector, I'm going to take this screen, this kind of light, because it serves the purpose, it will fit with the story. And then real time is one aspect of the story, but you can really play, and you have to really work with the software developer and the project manager so that you have the best result within the budget, within the planning, still taking the creative idea the closest that you can.
Great. I want to ask about tools really quickly. When you're creating these tools, you have to create new software, of course, for every project. Are there any tools from past projects that you've reused, like in the case of Disney? Were there any software lessons learned, for example, or pipeline things from Toy Story Mania or Turtle Talk with Crush, or some of the earlier real-time attractions? And same question for Alterface as well.
Okay, so in our case, there is one thing. It's Salto. It's a kind of show control game engine that we have developed internally. And this tool is in work in progress every time. I mean, we keep it and we add some new functionalities because we want it, or because it's our strategy, or because a customer is asking for something specific, or because we work with new partners, a new type of vehicle or anything. So it's something that we are going to constantly make evaluate. And then there is the vision where we want to go. For example, for the Popcorn Revenge, it was quite complicated because there were all these possible paths with the erratic room, in the dispatch room in the middle, and so all the vehicles could go in one room or another. So at the beginning, we start with After Effects, just taking the track layout and the vehicle and trying to find all the possible way, all the possible paths, and how long it was taking, and that kind of thing. And then the software developer has developed a tool, a simulation tool, so that we can really put a real track layout with the real vehicle and all the limitations from this vehicle. And this kind of tool has given us the possibility to see all the possible paths, to know really the length of each path, and really to build the attraction. So it was really useful, and it has been done because we needed it really for this project, and now we have it, we can improve it for the next project. And now we put some VR headsets, so now we can use the simulation and really be inside the attraction, and so we can see the movement of the vehicle fits with the content of the screen when you turn, that kind of thing. So it's an evolution. It's really a tool that we are going to keep for the next project.
Yeah, I would say for my experience, a lot of studios, there's really two eras of real-time attractions. There's sort of the before Unreal or Unity, game engines became the crux, and then after. So I think for Disney investing heavily in Unreal, now the Falcon can draw on lessons from the Dish. Galactic Star Cruiser can draw on lessons from Falcon, and tools can be shared. I think the sharing from the past things like Midway Mania or Disney Quest were really more about the design and the approach and the interactivity, but less about directly using the technology. And now virtual production is in the mix, so maybe more companies and more studios will be able to blend some of the discoveries in that area directly into attractions. So I think it's a great time to really, focus on an engine and embrace it and start to build a tool set around those engines.
Well, I was gonna end this by asking, what tools up and coming next gen designers can learn to best prepare themselves for the future. But I think you sort of just answered it. It's Unity and Unreal. It's changing everything, and that's kind of the purpose of today's content. So the last question that I'd like to ask all of you is, to what extent do you think we've capitalized so far on the potential of game engines and the types of experiences that they can create? What I'm really asking is, how can we avoid creating, duplicates of old attractions or thinking backwards with these new tools, trying to create the next dark ride or stunt show or, fireworks spectacular? How can we push the envelope again in the same way that Disneyland did in the 50s? How can we take this new technology and inspire the next generation to think differently about the limits and the constraints and the types of experiences that we can create?
I think that we are at an incredible opportunity from a design standpoint, that these tools are going to allow the synergy of many elements of design in real time that haven't necessarily been able to intersect at this speed before. And that's going to open up new abilities for interaction, agency, storytelling, and the different kinds of stories that we've been able to tell before. And that's going to open up new creative thought process within that. As a separate entity, I think what is also equally important is to understand, and our company, since I left Universal, we typically work with emerging markets and owners of other sectors. I think it's a very important message outside of the design space to the owners to understand you don't want to replicate other work that has existed, and to have the will to pursue these experimental technologies in a way to differentiate themselves from other brands. When we work in other countries, there's often a reliance on looking at what was done that's fabulous at Disney. How can they kind of capture a bit of that magic? But oftentimes that's framed in a constant of replicating what's there instead of differentiating from what's there, taking a lesson from that and pushing it much further into something that's innovative and unique to their brand. And I think this opportunity with what we have in this technology is it's not as reliant on following a singular protocol. And I'm hoping that coming out of this, the will of owners or the will of creatives working with owners around the world is going to allow us through that agency and this variability to kind of push the nature of what that limitation is, so that even if an owner is asking for something that's existed before, we have the freedom and capability to kind of expand it exponentially beyond that and get them excited about adopting that and having the will to pursue that to the end at a high quality level.
I guess I'll take a shot at it next. Sorry. I think, and Asa said this earlier, one of the biggest challenges is like this fixed 5 minute, maybe 6 minute on the outside experience. And I think that the interesting future challenge is things that break out of that mold. I mean, I think there's been certainly like first steps toward that in Galaxy's Edge, of an experience that bridges multiple attractions and sort of frames your day. And I think we're seeing more of that with Galactic Star Cruiser, where your hotel stay is an interactive experience, or your cruise. So I'm really interested to see how that evolves, how real time and tracking and sort of a narrative brain essentially can drive the entire day at a theme park or your entire stay, rather than just that 5 minutes, which I think we're getting pretty good at making that 5 minutes awesome. But there's still room to grow time horizon.
To build off that, I think we've really only begun to scratch the surface of what's possible relative to, fully participatory experiences. And I do think a piece of that is about making sure that we bring our guests along for their journey, right? I think there is, literally generations of established patterns of what the expectation is of a theme park experience, right? So much to the point where, I've seen guests behave in interactive experiences totally passively, because they didn't even expect that they could interact, or they were surprised when they were supposed to do something, right? Because that's not how they've come to understand and expect a theme park attraction to behave. So, I think there's been a lot of focus today on racers and shooters, because it's a mechanic that people understand. And again, you have to get them up to speed quickly, and you've only got 4 minutes, right? But certainly the domain of possibility is much, much broader than that. And so I think not only as the technology evolves, but also as our relationship to our guests evolve, that'll open up a space to much more interesting and exotic types of participatory experiences.
Yes, I agree. And theme parks are a marvelous playground, but yes, there are some challenges. The technology is there, but still you have to communicate with the guests so that they understand what they can do, what is possible. You have also to maybe educate or communicate with the customers so that they understand what is possible to do, and they don't just ask for something that has been done before. Or maybe when they make a new part of the park, the master planner is taking in account the new possibilities and design the park in a way it's going to include the new technology and the new possibilities of this technology. And then maybe there are going to be an evolution taking the best of the video game, this open world, the possibility to have multiplayers at the same time, and really something that depends to the choice from the visitors, and the best from the theme park, because it's really unique and marvelous, this decor, all the things that you can do for the visitors. And the behavior, the technology is cool, but the behavior of the human is even cooler. So you have to adapt this to the particular visitors that are not going to be attentive, that are maybe not listening to the instruction, and they just want to take some good time with the family. So it has to fit to their mind and to what they really want to do.
Last thing I want to add one more thought is that, today we've talked a lot about theme parks, but the nature of this technology to influence the cultural sector, museums, concerts, special events, we're only talking about it today in this single vertical space, but we really need to think about this application, universally. I mean, it's quite significant when you think about what this kind of participatory agency offers us across all of the elements of experiential entertainment and kind of interaction with guests wherever you are and whatever vertical you inhabit. It's really, it's a remarkable opportunity that's before us to kind of translate that knowledge and interaction, universally.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming today, and for those listening at home, I hope you found this educational. Coming out of this pandemic, things are going to be very different, where a lot of these technologies have evolved over the last year. Things like augmented reality, virtual reality, game engines, video cards are rapidly changing the types of entertainment that we consume, and they're only going to become more prominent in people's lives. The earlier we as an industry can adopt and embrace these technologies and live alongside some of those other technologies like AR and VR and video games, our industry will have a very bright future. So hopefully you found this educational and informative, and you're a little bit less scared to take the plunge into real-time content. Thank you for listening, and again, thanks to all of our panelists. Have a great day.
Thank you, Michael, Luis, Asa, Robert, and Laurence. I haven't experienced either of those attractions, but I can't wait to see them, now that I understand the magic behind them. That brings us to the close of our formal SATE Global Episode 2 presentations. Thank you so much for all our speakers today.